Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I know some people are joining via phone, and I just want to let you know, give you a heads up that we are here, and we'll be starting in just a few minutes. Thank you. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us on our webinar for using hop concepts during a changing times. I'm Justin. I'm the technology manager here at Fisher Improvement Technologies. And I'm going to be working in the background throughout the webinar to help everyone with questions and ensure everything runs smoothly for you. This will be an interactive experience today. We encourage your participation, so please join us. If you'd like to ask Rob a question, please use the raise hand feature, and we'll unmute you and you can speak, or you can use the Q&A feature, and I'll read that question for you. For statements or technical questions, please use the chat feature, and I'll get to those as soon as I can. We do have about 85 registered attendees today, so please bear with us as we get to your questions. It is my goal not to leave anyone out. And I'm also going to put up a quick anonymous poll for you. If you could take about 1 minute to complete that, and then Rob will get started with the webinar. Thank you very much.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another webinar. We're trying to do these to make sure that even though many of us are remote and many of us are working under changing environments, that we can keep people fresh and aligned with the concepts of human organizational performance. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rob Fisher. I own a company called Fisher Improvement Technologies. We've spent the last 30 years helping organizations and individuals understand how and why people get hurt, how and why people make mistakes, and what you can do about those mistakes. Can we prevent them? Can we mitigate the consequence? Or can we reduce the probability? So I'm going to spend a little time today, and it should be a little bit interactive. My goals today are to give you something that can help you in your organization, but especially now, we want to give you something that can work in your everyday life. I don't know if you're like me, but I'm actually working from home and remotely working now, as all of the people in our company are. And during this time of change, many people who are normally support to the field are actually working out of their homes. And so I'm going to apologize in advance. I didn't know I lived on a busy street until today. So if you hear a bit of background noise, I'm sure you're experiencing some of the same thing. I also want to give you some science basis for why we do what we do, and how change in particular impacts us, and then a little bit about leading under these difficult times. Get your fingers ready. We want this to be very interactive. I think I'm going to be the only mug that you see up there on the screen, but type those questions, and I'm going to pause, I believe 5 times during the webinar to ask very specific questions that you can interact with related to the topics that we just covered. And because this all moves fairly quickly, you'll be able to re-watch this on the Fisher Improvement Technologies YouTube channel when we're done, and make sure you share that with other people. So we've always known in human and organizational performance how important systems thinking was. I mean, it goes all the way back to Dr. Deming and the creation of lean modeling and Six Sigma process controls. What we need to understand is that the bigger the changes are, the more important the systems are. And right now, this is a drastic time of change for all of us. Everything is new. Almost everything is a first-time task. So we have to make sure that we are using our systems to the fullest of their capability. That's the way we measure our capacity. And as things change in our dynamic, that we understand the resilience associated with those systems. So from that systems approach, I want to take you back to some of the guiding principles of human and organizational performance and of what we call advanced error reduction in organizations. The first guiding principle is that performance is based on awareness, reinforcement, and self-motivation. More than ever, with so many people being diverse in the location for where they would be, we really have to be more aware and more self-motivated to use the concepts of human and organizational performance. And the reinforcement piece has become harder and harder as the change has happened. So to meet the first guiding principle, we have to take it on ourselves to continually remind ourselves to use the HOP concepts, but we and our team members have to be aware of those, and then we need to continually reinforce those attributes or those HOP concepts. The next one is just remember that people are fallible, and even the best will make mistakes. And that seemed like a pretty good guiding principle when we were all out there in the field, and human and organizational performance was something that field workers were supposed to use to reduce errors. But let's think about that from a different perspective today. Let's think about it from the perspective of most of us are now around completely different groups of people than we were before, for different reasons. So for instance, maybe we spend a lot of time at home, or maybe we spend a lot of time with our family and before, but we weren't all trying to work. Maybe your significant other or your spouse or your partner is trying to work in the same room with you, and you've never had to deal with that. Just understand we're going to make mistakes. We will make them, whoever's with us will make them. Some of you live alone, and the reality is that you're used to being alone, and you love going to work and being in that environment. So the very fact that you're home working alone with nobody to bounce ideas off of is different. So we have to understand the guiding principles now in this time of change make even more sense to what we need to manage personally and within our organization. But that understanding that people are fallible, none of us are really trying to hurt one another. None of us are really trying to be a pain in the butt, but sometimes we're going to make mistakes, and that's going to be even the best of us. The next guiding principle is that we will tend to react with unpredictable personality tendencies. That's especially important during times of change, because when we're doing the things we normally do around the people we normally do them around, so the tasks and people aren't changing much, then the task-based system doesn't really, it's fairly predictable. But we have to understand that different people with different personality tendencies will react differently to changes in that system. Your people-oriented people just see that we've got new people to work with and a different work environment. But process-oriented people may react differently because the processes they were used to having right there with them may be a little bit harder to get to. The process they want to use may not be available. Even if it's something as simple as, I normally have this printer and my computer hooks up to that, and when I need something and I like to have a piece of paper in my hand, I just print it out. But now I've got a different computer or a different printer or a different server. That throws change into our environment, and we will tend to react to that change within our very specific personality tendencies. So that's another guiding principle. We need to change our reactions to a response, and we'll talk about how to do that in a little while. The fourth of the guiding principles is that error traps are predictable and preventable, but only if you recognize them. Now, for field people, we've taught them in human and organizational performance to recognize traps, or at least I hope you have. And under the trap recognition, we want them to do something about it. But here we sit in a time of change. Again, some of us working from our homes, some of us working virtually or remotely, some of us having to interact with the field remotely when before we would do that in person. We have to be able to predict the error traps and how they're going to specifically impact ourselves and our team. And that means we've got to recognize them differently. So I'll put a little bit in the presentation in the webinar today on the error traps, and two very specific error traps that are impacting a lot of people under these times of change. The next guiding principle is that our values will influence individual behaviors, but the values of the smaller organization have more impact than the values of the larger organization. The impact of this guiding principle under times of change is that it may be that we haven't communicated our values for types of change, whether those be organizational values, family values, church values, team values. When things change, we have to go back and verify that we're still operating within our value set, and understand that we may be sitting at home, we may be working remotely. There may be some organizational values even associated with how you greet people and how you talk to people that may have to change a little bit based on the change in our environment today. So we have to understand that it's going to be different how we verify that those values are in place. And then the last of the guiding principles is that events can be avoided if we understand the real causes. We want to understand the drivers and apply the lessons learned. that's going to require more work for us during times of change, because the things that we normally have access to, the things that we normally would go look at, we may or may not be able to look at. We're going to be asked to make decisions under a little bit more stressful, more distractive, and more remote conditions. So in order to find the real causes, we really have to stick to the processes. And then understand that as a leader, your response to failure and success matters. A lot of times we can get away with we can get away with having a good response to failure, but not paying as much attention to success. Under these times of change, when someone succeeds, we really have to make sure that we respond to that success, because they may have had to do something extraordinary, and I'm sure you're having to do some things that are extraordinary, and we want to make sure that we collect that. We want to make sure that we understand that, because change is change. The change for COVID-19 that we're all doing will probably be a reactionary change to something else in 1, 2, 3, 5 years. So the more information we collect on how failure gets responded to, the better off we're going to be. So this is going to be the first participant input. And as Justin said, you can raise your hand. You can have him unmute you and ask a question directly, but I'm just going to pause here and ask, how can you use the guiding principles to manage change during this time?
Thanks, Rob. We do have our first question coming from Marco. I'm going to go ahead and allow Marco to talk and then go from there.
Okay, thank you. Hello, Marco.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Hi, good morning. So far, I don't have any question. Everything is clear. Thanks for your presentation and for your material here. And so from my side, everything is clear.
Can you repeat that again, or did you hear it, Justin?
Okay, no, for me, no questions so far.
Okay.
No.
Okay, good.
All right, thank you, Marco.
You're welcome.
How can you use the guiding principles to help manage change during these times? While we're bringing those in, I'll just tell you that I used to work out of my home, and then we got an office about 3 years ago, and I got used to working out of the office, and I'm used to traveling. So being sequestered and being at home and taking over my wife's office, I've really had to fall back on the guiding principles to be more aware, to be more self-motivated about what we need. Hopefully that she recognizes that I'm fallible and I'll make mistakes. But our reactions within our predictable personality tendencies means we're really using the tools to try to manage those personality tendencies, because we're in close proximity during a time that we didn't used to normally be. So anyone else, can you share with us how you can use the guiding principles to help manage change?
It looks like Dana just put up in chat that number 3 resonates with her as a blue-yellow because working from home limits their love of bouncing ideas off of others.
Yeah, what a great input, Dana. That understanding that we'll react and needing to change that to some kind of response, we have to do different things, because that collaboration tool that we're used to, someone in the cubicle next door, or what I used to call flybys. I thought of something because I saw someone, and then we had a great fresh set of ideas. We don't have that, so we have to use intentionality to make that happen. It's not going to happen on its own. Excellent input, Dana. Any other input on how you can use the guiding principles to manage change during these times?
If I could jump in for just a second, Rob. It looks like we do have a few people that are trying to use the question and answer feature to communicate with each other. I'm not sure if they're going to be able to see that unless I actually answer those questions. So if any of the attendees want to communicate with each other, you can use the chat function, and then under the to box, there's a little down arrow, and you can select who you want to send that message to. So if y'all would use the chat box for that, I think that would work better for you. Thank you.
Okay, great. Anything else for me, Justin? All right, so let's
Not at
move
this
on.
time. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about this task-based system. Now, we use the task-based system because it's interdependent. But I wanted to go a little bit deeper into the task-based system because during times of change, remember the task-based system was designed because the things on the outside of the system are all dynamic, and dynamic means they change. So what we have to do is teach ourselves and our people to watch for that change, and then we will tend to react to that change based on our personality tendencies. So back to the statement that Dana made before, we will tend to like or specifically manage certain attributes of this task-based system based on our personalities. But we have to learn to actually respond, to look at things differently, to watch for risk and change coming from places that we don't normally do that from. And a lot of people ask about the task-based system, what the separation is. Well, we've got two different types of drivers. We have individual drivers. Those are things that impact the individual, the error traps, the performance modes, personality tendencies, and triggers. We'll talk about a few of those. But we also have systemic drivers. And the systemic drivers are those things that even during change, things are going to come from the same place. I'm saying that wrong. Things are going to come from the outside of this system to impact the other parts of the system and the individual. And just because you're in chaotic change doesn't mean that the system is going to be different. This system can work even in times of change. The risk or the change may be coming from different parts of that system. I hope I said that okay. But understand why it works that way. If you think back, Stephen Covey has presented this, and a lot of people have said it. Let's look at the way the task-based system was designed, because it was designed with intentionality. Okay, in the center of the task-based system are things that are under your control. I control my attitude. I control my actions. I control what goes into my body. I control what comes out of my body. But really, that's about it. That's all you control. So our sphere of control is fairly small. But we also have what is called the sphere of influence, or the circle of influence. The intentionality behind the task-based system was that those things may not be under your direct control, the other people, programs, processes, work environment, organization, equipment, but they are under your influence. In other words, we can influence change. We can influence the turn from a reaction to a response. We can influence the equipment, but we can't control it. Under these changing times, though, our biggest challenges come from areas of concern. I couldn't draw this circle big enough to really explain today what the constant barrage of the news, what the constant details on the number of people in the country, in the world, in your state, in your county or parish, in your city. All of those things are of concern to us, but we only have control over what we do, and we have some influence over how we use our equipment, the people that are around us, what work environment we establish, whether we have processes that we're going to use to do things. So this task-based system now becomes our system for helping us manage change in this dynamic environment that we get. And I don't know about yours, but I see mine changing every day, sometimes hour by hour. So we would have thought that, okay, we've made a transition. We were at work, and now we're working remotely, and we'll just do our work. But I don't know about you, that isn't what's happened. The equipment's different. The people around me are different. The work environment is different. I'm having to use different processes. I've discovered for our organization, there were some programs that we didn't have. And organizationally, things are much tougher than they were when we were all together. So the task-based system is vital from a human organizational performance perspective during times of change. We also need to start relying more on the science bases that make up HOP. And the first one is that about 90% of events are caused by something other than just the individual. Even when we're working remotely, even under times of strain or duress, we have to understand that Deming's principles still apply. In other words, when someone does something, there's a 90% probability it wasn't just that person just doing something because they knew it was going to be wrong. There's a 90% probability they were doing it because they thought it was going to be right. And remember that physiologically, we are all reacting to the same to the stimuli. It just happens at different times in us. The way we react to stress, the way we react to distractions, 95% of us have the same physiological wiring and reactions to those stimuli. So by understanding that, it makes us fairly predictable, or stoplights wouldn't work, because we understand that the human wiring is fairly predictable for about 95% of us. And that really makes up the overwhelming majority of the workforce and the people that you work around and the people in your family. Now, going back to that, some of you are now around families that have different needs. Some of you are working around people that have special needs. That piece has to be taken into account because 95% of us react physiologically the same to the stimuli, but there's going to be about 5% that don't. And we have to understand that those folks are going to be different. But what we do is we will do things based on what makes sense to us at that time or in that moment. In other words, Sidney Decker's work on what people do, what they do at the time, they do it for reasons that make sense to them at the time. What makes things make sense to people are that task-based system, people, programs, processes, work environment, organization, equipment, and the way we will tend to react or respond to changes in that system, because it is not common sense. So that attribute of not trying to believe that everyone should have common sense. You know, common sense is your belief that I should believe the way you believe on whatever it is we're talking about. And you probably know in your family, in your current work environment, we had a opportunity yesterday. They're building some houses in our neighborhood. It just didn't make any sense to me that people would start working at 7 a.m. on a house when other people are trying to get up and move about the day. But it's not about common sense. It's about what people need to do in that moment to get their task done. So it's not that they were trying to disrupt the neighborhood. It's that they're trying to get a job done. And now we understand they're trying to get that job done before, I don't know about your city, but in our cities, they're closing down the cities pretty quickly. So our choice to shelter voluntarily turns out to be a good choice because we're working out those bugs associated with that system before we have to be good at it. So let's take another participant input moment. How can you lead change using the task-based system and those general understandings? And I'll just pause and take questions and input.
Thank you, Rob. I'd like to start out by reading a couple of statements from the chat, just because I know that there is a few phone call-in listeners.
Okay, great.
So we have a statement from Stu saying, you need to communicate the organizational value of minimizing risk by practicing social distancing, and that what they're doing is important. I thought that was really valuable. We also have a statement from Douglas. The smaller organizations' actions tend to affect the larger organizations within the system, which is happening now with COVID-19.
Yeah, those are excellent points. That piece of the values, this is a great opportunity at home, at home and at work, to communicate how we're really trying to meet certain values by things like social distancing, how you are exhibiting the characteristic of a leader by making sure that the toughest one for me has been not touching my face. I really have to think about that. So I appreciate you guys' input. That's great ways that you can lead change by using the task-based system. Anyone else? How can you lead change using the task-based system of general understandings?
Yes, I do have a question coming in from Tim, who raised his hand. You can go ahead and unmute yourself, Tim.
Can you unmute Tim?
He may not have a microphone hooked up. Tim, if you would like to type your question in the Q&A box down below, I can get to that as well.
Okay, while he's doing that, Justin, just interrupt me when that question comes in.
Sure. I do have a few more coming in as well.
Okay, great. Let's go for it.
Stu is asking, are you saying that the task-based system stays the same, but the components in that system are dynamically changing?
So the system itself, the components of the system, what you see on the screen is fixed in that you don't need to add anything or take anything away. But the inputs to those elements are what changes. So the people element may change depending on who is around you. The process element, for us, the process element changed because our way that we communicated specific needs in our office had to create a different process. Certainly all of our work environments has changed. So I hope I'm answering your question. The system has the components you need to look at, but the feeders to those components are what changes.
Thank you, Rob. And then I have another one from Bill. Bill asks, how do you account for the challenges or opportunities when dealing with a union workforce is such a fluid change environment?
That's a great question. And the way I recommend approaching that is that the piece about it being a union is less important than the piece about everybody being people. So it's just going to be a different kind of change. And whether you're in a bargaining unit environment, a union environment, or an open environment, again, if you go back to the guiding principles and you go back to the values that people are trying to exhibit, and you use the task-based system and those general understandings, then you can usually come to terms. Our experience has been, and I know we've got a couple of consultants on here, and we're probably going to talk about this on next week's webinar. Our experience has been when you integrate with a union workforce, then their engagement goes way up because they can bucket things in the way they want to tell you about latent conditions within those systemic drivers. So Bill, I hope that answers your question. But the more you stick to the system, the less it is about whether somebody's union or non-union, whether they like things or don't like things. Keep things in the systems environment.
Great. I did have a statement come in from Tim. He says that they have stabilized as many system attributes to help lead change during these times. For example, stabilizing equipment, programs, organizations, and processes while other things are changing.
Yeah, that's a great use of when a company is integrating Arrow or human performance or human organizational performance. One of the things they do in that integration is that they then start to look at all of the elements of human and organizational performance when they're trying to manage their work. And we'll show that with the essential leadership cycle in a little while. That's a great point, Tim, is that the more the organization helps to stabilize these, the less change the individual sees and the less they have to react to, so that they can actually respond to smaller changes in the system, because we're systemically controlling the latent conditions that the chaos is producing. Thank you for that, Tim.
And another one coming in from Dana. Our marketing department at the college put up information about available and remote student resources on our homepage, but buried it under the COVID link. Our students in distress will not be browsing that link to get info that they need to access the resources. As a relator, I talked to them to ensure they linked it differently so students could find this info immediately to lower their stress.
That's great input, Dana, because now you're managing those elements of the system that could impact people. When we don't take everyone's personality tendencies into account, then we tend to put things or do things in a way that would work for us, but there's a whole group of people out there that it might not work for. So I appreciate that you did that, and everybody on here can learn that the more available, the further up you make that information and not tied to the chaos, not tied to COVID-19, the better off you're going to be. Because like you said, and my experience is, every time you mention COVID-19, it goes off on one tangent, but every time you mention things like managing change and managing risk, it is in a completely different direction. Excellent input, Dana.
Great. And I'll read off two more and then we'll continue, okay?
Okay.
From Carl, how is this process impacted in an organization that does not have good alignment?
Well, in an organization that doesn't have very good alignment, what we've seen is that they may not be aligned, but at least each individual has the tools, techniques, science, and knowledge to manage their task. So this is a task-based system. It needs far less alignment than something like a values system or a management of change. An MOC process requires some alignment. The task-based system is there so that this person on this task at this time, no matter what that task is, can manage that task better with lower risk and can manage the changes around. So a lot of people ask, well, what kind of alignment do you have to start HOP? And our answer has always been the same. You don't, because it's going to be created through the initiation of using the systems approach. So I hope that's answering your question.
And then we just have a really great point from Douglas coming in. Make sure that your communications in the system lead change in tasks within that system, especially when the information is as important as the COVID-19 directives, which is ever changing at this time.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great point, Douglas, because we're getting a lot of, we're hearing about programs at the city level, state level, and maybe that program is shelter in place. And I know Stu did a post on this the other day. But the process for what that means, the process for us staying sequestered may be different based on where we need to be. So the communication of what process you really want people to use is vital. And we need to communicate it in the form of who, what, how, and why. So again, we're using our understanding of personality tendencies to help communicate changes that we know of in the system as an organization. Excellent point. Shifting gears a little bit, I want to talk about two of the major traps that seem to be impacting people today. The first one is stress. And we need to be able to watch for the obvious triggers of stress. Someone being obviously frustrated or maybe they shut down. Some people get impatient or they have heavy sighs. They just have that flustered look. It can be an emotional outburst, or the opposite. They can withdraw. But with what's going on in the world today, it's all of those things and the way we're individually reacting to those things that is actually driving the stress. And in some personality types, change itself is enough to drive stress. What we have to remember is we can't take away the stressor. We have to help people respond to the condition of stress. And that becomes vital during this time of change. My wife and I had this conversation this morning because we were a bit frustrated from where all of the stress was coming from when we realized that we can't control the input of the stress. What we can control is what we do about it, how we manage it. And we have to have some tools to be able to do that. So in my opinion, one of the biggest traps that people are going to fall into and make a mistake, either in the field or at home or during engagement or while they're working, is stress. And we have to understand that stress increases error rate, and people are fallible, and even the best will make mistakes. The second one that I think is driving a lot of the challenges are distractions. And for some of you that are looking at the webinar, you may actually be distracted by the way distractions is written. And so we, again, can't often control, there, I touched my face again. We often can't control the input of a distraction. So what we have to do is manage our time, manage our process, manage the task-based system, and use tools once we recognize that distraction is a trap that we are about to fall into. Once you've fallen into it, it's not too late, but you have to be able to recognize that. You cannot just tell people don't be distracted, especially with all the change going on right now. Our minds don't work that way. We have to have a tool to manage what our brains naturally do. And I'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. Another attribute that has really come about in human organizational performance is some of the thinking fast and slow, System 1 and System 2 thinking, that was developed by Daniel Kahneman. And if you're sequestered at home, it's a great book to read. It's got some really good stuff in it. Now, Kahneman was an economist, but he talks about how our brain works. And if you think about it, my fist represents the limbic region of your brain. Hundreds of thousands of thoughts per second. We don't think about any of it. That's System 1. And this part of the presentation was created by Nada Winsel, a neuroscientist from Australia. So she said that this represents the limbic region of your brain, or the System 1. But this represents the slower part of your brain, System 2. And they don't really connect. There's space between them. We have to learn to move things from System 1, that fast 186,000 miles a second process brain, to the slow brain, where we can problem solve, where we can do things with conscious thought. Now, the reason why this is important during times of change is that whether it's stress or distractions or any of the other traps, our brains want to default to the limbic region. We will stay there even through change if we don't have an impetus, if we don't have some kind of motivator or tool to move from System 1 to System 2. And System 1 may be fast, but under changing conditions, it's very error prone. If you think about it, if you're driving down the road and all of a sudden a huge rainstorm starts falling, your brain really wants to just keep driving with cruise control on the way you were before the rainstorm started. If you don't push that into your System 2 brain, then your System 1 brain will retain those actions in the back of your mind. And what's going to happen is you're going to become more error prone because you didn't push it to System 2, We have a lot of information on System 1 and System 2 on our website. There's some observations on it, but especially during times of change, it's important to understand that these two elements of it working automatically, but being very error prone, those are the highlights in System 1 during times of change. So we have to learn to watch for the triggers for where we are at. Triggers are those clues, those indications. They're observable actions or reactions. They're a recognized thought. Sometimes they're the personality tendency drivers or the vulnerabilities. It could be someone scratching their head or saying, I think, I believe, or I'm pretty sure. We can utilize our 5 senses to make sure that we're watching for triggers. And when we get that gut feeling that something is wrong in a time of change, you have to pay attention to that trigger, because what it's telling you during a time of change, if I've got a gut feeling that something isn't right, the probability I'm going to make a mistake is as high as 50%. So again, whether we're working remotely, whether we're interacting with our families, whether we're interacting with our teammates over Skype or Zoom, or whether we've got people in the field, triggers now are more important than ever. So what can you do about it? Well, what you have to be able to do is to turn that trigger that tells you you're vulnerable into the use of a tool. Human organizational performance doesn't do much for us if it's just a set of theories. It's about how you take that set of theories and turn it into a practical application for an individual. If you use the right tool the right way at the right time, you can decrease the probability for error in factors of 10. So the HOP tools really do matter. And I just want to introduce you to one that we have introduced called personal intervention. Because what we noticed was, unless something moved from System 1 to System 2, then someone was going to forget to do one of the tools. So what personal intervention does is it helps us to slow down and think about whether the system is changing around us, whether we're in System 1 or System 2 and what we need to move, whether we're trying to move a reaction to stress to a response, whether we're trying to manage distractions. And personal intervention is a simple form of pause and play. And I just wear a wristband that has a pause button and a play button on it. And when I need to slow down and manage the triggers, I push my pause button. When I need to do something that I wouldn't naturally do, I push my play button. So the importance of that is that it is a physical action of pushing pause and play, not just thinking about it. Thoughts can happen in System 1. They really don't register. When you use the physical action, even if you're imagining a pause and play button on your wrist, what that does is it allows you to use the tools, and you're using them with intentionality. You verbalize intentionally. If you're distracted, if you're stressed, by verbalizing, it connects your brain to the action that you're trying to take, or seeking out help. Some of us are good at that. Some of us are not so good at it. It is very difficult in this time of change to seek out help. I don't know whether they're available. I don't know whether they have time for me. And then 3-part communication becomes important, because we want to make sure that we say things and that people get what we're trying to say, and vice versa. It's okay to say, let me just repeat that back to you. So back to participant input. When and how can you use the tools in times of change to help yourself and others around you?
So the chat has been blowing up for the past couple of minutes, and it all started with a really great comment from Judy. Judy said, I have found turning off the mainstream media has eliminated a lot of the input of stressors. It helps my yellow over blue have no need to react. Rather, I can manage what I should do to really research and how I choose to respond. And that seemed to really resonate with a lot of people.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And the reason why it resonated, if we go back to this task-based system, you are controlling the information you get intentionally by controlling the equipment that that information comes in on. So when you take control of that, as I think it was Tim that said, then you limit the amount of all types of information. But right now, a lot of us are just seeing the bad news, or we're reacting to every single change. So that's a great way to use. And look, it's hard to do it, so we may have to push our play button to do that. But all of the other things get then impacted. The stress is lowered. The distractions are lessened. So that's great input, Judy. Thank you.
Yeah, that actually really made me think that we all need to recognize that most people out there that you are interacting with, or you see on social media, or even family members, don't have these tools or don't know these tools. So we really have to remember that it's our responsibility to manage our own tendencies when interacting with these other people that just don't have the tools to manage themselves.
Yeah, that's a great point, Justin. And the other thing is, during these times of change, it would be a great time to introduce them to them. And I'll put a slide up here in a very short time on that. You have anything else, Justin?
Yeah, I have a lot. I'm just trying to keep up with all of the chat. A lot of people just being very, speaking very positively towards using pause and play and how it's helped them. Let's see. The power of pause and play enables a higher level of critical thinking, which we all need in critical times like now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Being a red-green, I have used the pause and play buttons daily since receiving my bracelet. It works great for me to take time to respond instead of react. I do have a question from Paul. How can a green-blue survive when nothing is going as planned? They have no control and they can't naturally plan.
So that's a great question, and the answer is, and again, we had this conversation this morning about changing from or translating from our normal need into the current situation. How do we take the current situation and plan the things we can plan? So the toppy colored green blue, for those of you who don't know, is a relating thinker. They like to think, they like to plan, they like to process, and the chaos is what drives the stress. So because we can't make the chaos go away, what I suggest is that you take control of the things that you can control and do a personal inventory of that, and then take an inventory of what you can influence, and try, as Judy said, try to eliminate a lot of the things that you are concerned about but you have no control or influence over, and that's kind of a levelizing factor. So I apologize for skipping ahead. I wanted to talk a little bit about trust, and it kind of follows on with Paul's and Judy's comments and some others. We have to understand that the essential leadership cycle helps us develop. So Paul, again, a piece of the answer to your question is, when you use processes and models as a toppy color green, it really provides some of the hows that your brain needs. So substituting the use of a process or a model in the place of being able to plan things out may be edging you towards a little more towards your comfort zone. And by us providing that, we have to remember that we're in different places where trust is changing. We don't know how our family's going to react to us being in the house. We don't know how we're going to develop or manage trust among our workforce. So just remember that two of the four major personality types, we don't mind asking people to trust us. But the other two think that if you ask them to trust you, especially during times of change or chaos, then you must be hiding something. And that actually depletes trust. It doesn't generate trust. It's also very personal, and we should develop trust. So it's going to take a little bit of time to develop trust. And one of the challenges in our current changing environment is that when you get conflicting information, it becomes hard to trust. So once trust is lost, we find it difficult to regain it in some cases. So as we work remotely, as we engage remotely, as our field is out there, we really have to make sure that we go back to, are we self and team aware? Are we dealing with those shared vision and values? Are we sharing them right? And have we been clear about what the roles and processes are so that that generates trust instead of just asking people to trust us? So some way, I'm just going to stop and ask for questions, and it can be participant input if you want, or I'll just take another list of questions. I've got one other small section, and we've got about 7 minutes left on the webinar. Justin, do you have any other questions or comments that came in?
No, let's give it just a moment to see if any come in.
Okay.
I'll go ahead and read a comment from Wally in the meantime. As a yellow-blue, I have been using pause a lot as I'm getting agitated not being able to get things done, as well as having face-to-face conversations. When I find myself getting upset and wanting to send an email that could be perceived poorly, I pause and walk away from the computer. Going outside has helped.
That is a great input, and really what Wally's saying is he's managing the parts of the task-based system that he has some control over. And if you put it, normally things are coming in, and at work we can go face-to-face interact with somebody if they piss us off, or if we don't like what they say, or vice versa. We've got some way, some outlet to do that. But I really appreciate what Wally said, because if we don't control the equipment, if we don't push pause and take a deep breath and go out and get some air, then our reaction could really add more chaos and more change when that wasn't what our intent is. So that's the power of personal intervention, and we hear this from all over the world, is that it helps you manage turning your reaction into a response. Even though that email may have gone out 20 minutes later, it didn't cause 5 hours worth of turmoil. So that's a great way of using pause and play. Thanks for sharing that, Wally. Also, just want to show, and this is something that people have been talking about, that a lot of your families may be, and a lot of the people that work for you or around you, their families may be questioning their interaction with the healthcare system. If they haven't already, they will be. We have a very good friend and cousin of my wife that is interacting with the healthcare system right now. But different people need information differently. The wife of that family keeps asking, why can't I go see him? Why can't I be there? Why can't there just be one family member? But the husband of the family may be saying, I need to get out of here. I'm not as sick as everybody. I'm not as sick as that person over there. So we've developed this intentional communications card specifically to manage the concern, the chaos, and the change around families' interactions with the healthcare system, because most families have only interacted with the healthcare system as well people or as having to go to the emergency. You know, some of us have had surgeries and things like that. But here we sit in a completely different environment. So we have these published in PDF form. If you want one, let us know. But if you haven't, make sure you download the eColors app onto your mobile device. If you have children under about the age of 14, down to about 7, go on to the equilibria.com website and download and have them take the Junior Personality Diversity Indicator. Many of you are homeschooling and you never have, and you're not really homeschooling, but you're trying to keep your kids educated while the school systems can't. So if you understand how their personality needs information, it's going to be a whole lot easier. There's another resource out there, ecolorsineducation.org, has a lot of material that you can use to manage that. And just during these times of change, make sure you know your why. When times get tough, and by the way, they're here, but that doesn't mean they're going to get tougher. That's when your why matters. We need to make sure we understand what to do and then do that. Understand a little bit about what works and what doesn't, and then what we can do about it. Learn how to do things differently. If we keep changing the method, then eventually people will just cave. And then know who to go to. Have some go-to folks. I have some people that I call accountability and thinking partners. And I will tell you, it is way less accountability partner now and way more thinking partner now. But make sure you keep those things in mind. We have additional content available. I'm going to open up for any questions. I think we've got about 2 minutes left on the webinar. And I know Justin's also going to put out a closeout survey. So if you wouldn't mind filling that out after we go. I really hope that we're providing some real information and tools that get those thought juices going. We understand it's chaotic. We understand that everything is changing by the day, by the hour, or by the minute. But we also want people to understand that that's why systems were created, is to help us manage in times of change. So I'm going to open it up for any other questions. For some of you who want to stay on a couple of minutes long, I think we can stay on a couple of minutes long and finish answering any questions. Justin, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, that's totally fine by me, Rob. We can stay on as long as you can. I have a bit of a clarification question coming in from Kyle. Kyle says, if I understand correctly, I can use the essential leadership cycle in times of change by realizing that others may not see or understand situations as I do, and I need to be considerate to all the different personality styles and triggers.
Kyle, I couldn't have said it better myself, especially in times of chaos or times of change. You know, we tend to normalize a lot of the things on that essential leadership cycle when times are stagnant or when times are predictable. And it kind of goes back to Paul's question. When times aren't predictable, that self and team awareness block and understanding that we may need to frame things, as I think it was Doug that said, in the shared vision and values, how we make sure that we're framing things so that things are actually pretty clear to both of us. That was just a great way to say it, Kyle. Thank you. And the answer is yes. Work on those driving elements, especially during times of change, and you'll get those outcomes. If you're working over there in those resultant conditions, worried about trust, worried about accountability, worried about whether you're going to learn or not, then you're probably just reacting to change instead of responding to the current conditions. Thank you for that, Kyle.
We have one coming in from Jordan. Jordan says, my manager has done a good job of implementing many aspects of the essential leadership cycle to help our team stay productive and accountable to our objectives during these interesting times with clarity and trust as well.
That's great, Jordan. And one of the things that we need to make sure we do is specifically tell people what attribute that we're talking about. So it's important that they manage it. And you know, Jordan, happen to realize that they're using the Essential Leadership Cycle, it's important sometimes to tell people that that's what we're doing, because again, if you and your leaders fall back on processes and systems, then the people around you will fall back on processes and systems. But if they think that it's just something that you're making up as you go, like some of the things we're seeing on TV, then they'll pay attention to it about as much as the stuff that they see on TV. So that's a great point, Jordan. When we use those processes and systems, again, it kind of goes back to Paul's point. It gives us a little bit of normalcy for process, and then we're relying on the system to get us through. We're not just relying on our reactions. Well, I just want to say thank you to everyone. We'll be doing another webinar next Wednesday. It's next Wednesday. The webinar is going to be a little bit more interactive and a little bit changing, because we're going to have some of our consultants answering questions about integration. So thank you for sharing your time with us. I hope we added value, and we'll see you again soon. Please manage your tendencies during these times of change.
Hey, Rob, can we get one more in?
Sure.
Great. Just coming in from Wally. Wally says, thanks for doing this. I appreciate having time to reflect. He's wondering what a specific direction like shelter in place or social distancing might look like using the who, what, how, why model.
Well, I think what's happening is, at least what's happening in the towns that are close to us, and Wally, I believe you're at one of the epicenters, so it's probably a little bit more chaotic there. They would say, they put out everyone should shelter in place, but nobody knows what that means. And now I've heard that there's a difference between sheltering in place, which is an emergency response term, and self-isolation, which is a term that kind of describes what we want people to do. We want people to choose to isolate themselves. So the who, what, how, and why would, let's explain, who do we really want to social distance? So in the beginning, for social distancing, we didn't say, it was kind of implied that since the virus only affected old people like me, that kids shouldn't have to social distance. So by leaving that who out and the why out that was related to that who, the what didn't matter to them. They weren't going to pay any attention to it. And we've all seen the result of that is now that 50% of the cases are people under 40. When before we were thinking, those people are all going to be safe. It's just the elderly that are the problem. So I think that for each of those, you can craft for shelter in place. What does that mean? Does it mean you can go outside or stay inside? Who are we really talking about? And what is the definition of an essential worker? And because you're an essential worker, does that mean you can go out and do anything? Or does it mean home to work, work to home, home to work, work to home? I think if we craft our recommendations based on those, then we're going to get a lot further down the line. Wally, I hope I'm answering your question.
You sure did. Thank you, Rob. Everyone, thank you so much. We had a really great turnout today. For the majority of the webinar, we had 83 attendees out of the 85 that registered. So we really appreciate you all participating and joining us. We'll be in touch soon.
Thank you.